World building. The term is everywhere these days. You can't go 2 pages on the internet without hearing it. The MCU has fantastic world building. The world building in Witcher 3 is amazing. We're constantly being told that stories need world building, which is integral to any work of fiction, and it is the very core of any good fantasy or science fiction story. What once was a term used for a certain strain of second world fantasy fiction has spread across cultural criticism and is heard in university literature classes and video game reviews in equal measure. So what is world building? As per Chuck Wendig, the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of Star Wars Aftermath, world building is everything and anything inside that world: money, clothing, territorial boundaries, tribal customs, building materials, imports and exports, transportation, sex, food, the various types of monkeys people possess, whether the world does or does not contain satanic twerking rites. World building, therefore, is just not the act of creating a fictional setting, a setting in which your story takes place in. It is the act of fleshing out an imaginary world that feels real. When done correctly, there will be no question left in that world for the reader to fill in the answer to. Everything from where do superheroes get their underwear mended to the price per liter of blue milk would be worked out, at least in the writer's mind, even if not on the screen. This is not possible, but world building expects the author to have the rules that are logically followed to their conclusions. The problem with world building is that audiences have come to expect books, films, and TV shows to meet a certain standard that an author can't possibly and probably isn't trying to meet. I see people around me encounter a story outside of the modes of actual realism or for world building realism, and they don't know how to evaluate it. They believe that a different way of seeing reality aren't invitations to see reality in a new way yourself, but simply failures of world building. And that's fucking stupid. At the same time, fans, and I use the term lightly, of world building works focus not on the arc of the story, the struggles of the characters, or the aesthetic power of the fiction. They focus on the inevitable moments when world building breaks down. My least favorite example of this is the crazy fan theory. These normally begin on a site like Reddit and then spread like a Californian wildfire across the internet. Why didn't the giant eagle simply fly forward to Mount Doom? Well, it would be a really boring story if they did. That doesn't satisfy fans, who instead create fan theories that explain and fix and change the way we see famous works like The Lord of the Rings. These crazy fan theories exist for basically every popular book or movie that has been ever produced. And these crazy fan theories are the reason for every director making genre movies having to do hundreds of press conferences after their movie is released explaining every detail that hasn't been explained in the movie. The urge to fix or explain art is one we should always be suspect of. At the same time, the appeal to realistic portrayal of alien or magical beings doesn't have anything to do with realism. Magical creatures don't exist. If aliens exist, we don't know what they're like yet. Human history doesn't illuminate the history of fictional creatures. The call to make such races more complex is not to make them more true to the reality of dragons, aliens, or giant eagles. It is a call to make them more human and thus more interesting and relatable to a human audience. To be honest, I don't think that world building in fiction is inherently bad. There is a place for all kinds of narrative houses in the vast city of fiction. My argument is that world building is overrated and overused. That a concept that's useful for certain kinds of fiction, such as epic second world fantasy or role-playing games that require clear rules for gamers to follow, is being inappropriately applied to all fiction genres. That expectations for world building in all genres have become a problem, causing audiences and critics to focus on background details while missing the essential aspects of a story and leading to quick dismissals of different fictional modes. In his essay on electricliterature.com, writer Lincoln Michael has a term for what I'm trying to get across in lieu of world building: world conjuring. He says, I made a distinction between the common concept of world building, the idea that worlds should have clear rules the reader can understand, and that authors should work out the realistic workings of the world beyond the scope of the story, and the idea that more details equals better fiction, and what I called world conjuring, evoking a world through the thematic and resonant details without being overly concerned with whether or not the world could truly exist. World conjuring does not attempt to construct a scale model in the reader's bedroom. World conjuring uses hints and literary magic to create the illusion of a world, with the reader working to fill in the gaps. World building imposes. World conjuring collaborates. Some readers say that world building creates a more immersive world and helps the reader slide into the story easier. Different audiences need and want different things, so this is surely true for some people. For me, however, I'll say that excessive world building tends to take me out of the story. Because the world building is conveyed unrealistically, and the focus on the world building details only highlights how impossible world building actually is. By conveyed unrealistically, I mean that the painful exposition where characters explain their world to each other in a way that nobody would ever do in real life. If you simply tell me that someone has a hammer that calls forth lightning and can only be picked up by who the hammer considers to be worthy, I'm there with you, baby. But if you spend 10 pages explaining how the hammer is built of moonstones and therefore friggin' Moon Knight can control the said hammer, I'm way more likely to be thinking about how the explanation doesn't make any sense. Let me ask you this. Was Star Wars improved by midichlorians and trade negotiations? I noted how often fans poke holes in massive world-building works like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or A Song of Ice and Fire. I also noticed plenty of holes in the plots and worlds, and it's hard not to think that they're so glaringly precise because the work spends so much time world-building. By contrast, let's take a look at comics. You don't question how Superman flies, he just does. Or how Batman can master all the martial arts styles in the world in just 10 years. Or how does Tony Stark maintain that perfect goatee. Comics just throws crazy shit at you without stopping to pretend it could really work. I never stopped to wonder about the workings of Doom Patrol's world because Grant Morrison wasn't asking me to. And that brings me to a movie that I believe illustrates the point of world conjuring the best. Green Lantern Emerald Knights is a DC animated movie released in 2011 that tells various stories featuring members of the Green Lantern Corps, including Abin Sur, Lyra, Kilowog, and Mogo. Now, this is an origin story told in an anthology format, and that by its very existence assumes you know nothing about the comic book mythology of the Green Lanterns. Hell, it doesn't even focus on the titular Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, even though he is in the story and is the primary narrator of 5 stories that make up this overarching narrative. The movie begins with a long-forgotten foe of the universe, Krona, awakening from the antimatter universe and coming to the matter world, I guess, to the sun of the Ova sector of space. We're told Krona created the antimatter world and was trapped there by the Guardians at the infancy of creation. The rest of the how and the what are left to us and our imagination. With that said, the Guardians start clearing out Ova. This is how scared they are of Krona returning. In terms of context, we're not given much, but the general concept of how powerful Krona was, annihilating nearly all of creation. That he would scare the guys who run the goddamn Green Lantern Corps, and I think that's amazing. I don't need to be told how Krona created the antimatter universe or destroyed nearly all of creation, just that he could. His power is to be feared, not understood. The science behind the fiction is left entirely a mystery to me. We see the world of the Green Lanterns through the eyes of the rookie Arisha, who is being mentored by the greatest lantern of them all, Hal Jordan of Earth. And she is bewildered by the grand scope of things she is now involved in. She was just a student working on maths problem just last week after all. Now she's chosen to be a part of something much bigger than herself. As I watch this, it starts to dawn on to me how the Green Lanterns Corps are an army. Something which has not occurred to me before, despite having Corps in the name. But the more I think about how the ring doesn't stand on ceremony, the more I'm convinced that this is a draft. Once its holder dies, it shoots off and finds the next person it thinks is worthy, and the new guy has no choice. He or she has been drafted into an intergalactic army, and as Deegan says so effectively in the next story, your life is not yours anymore. For the record, I know in the comics being a standard Green Lantern is optional and you can give up the ring whenever you wish. The Corps does not want to force people with great willpower to do something they do not want, and that is not the case in the movie though, which I am viewing as a work on its own merits. Back to story time. Hal tells Arisha of the first lantern. The first one given a ring was not the first lantern. The first was Avra. Arisha hears as we do at the beginning of creation when there was much imbalance in the universe with evil reigning supreme. And so the Guardians decided to forge a weapon, a ring, out of the light of willpower, a weapon to bring peace to the universe. Once again, the how and the why are immaterial. We aren't asking those questions because the story is not allowing us to. We are collaborating with the story. We are accepting that willpower is reflected in the green light of the rings, and that willpower can be forged into rings by tiny blue floating domes. And I think that's magical. Avra then, in the heat of battle, when all odds are against him, does something the Guardians never intended the ring to do at all. Through sheer force of will, he creates the first construct, a giant sword. He overcomes all doubts and all fears and creates something new, not through science or technology or even magic. He creates something out of his own will. I do not need to know what Avra's favorite breakfast cereal was to understand how through his amazing will, this once meek scribe has changed the world around him. As the story progresses, we see how Kilowog became the feared drill sergeant that he is today. We are shown how he's trained in the harshest of environments by the harshest of teachers, Deegan. Kilowog hates Deegan, and as we look at the training sequences, we aren't wondering if there are other drill sergeants out there training other squads. We're wondering how Kilowog will overcome this and become one of the greatest lanterns ever. Deegan imparts to him the understanding that he was tough on them because that is the only way he knew to teach them how to stay alive as a soldier. With his dying breath, he tells Kilowog that he would never let them die during training, and that only the best make it to being a lantern. And to believe in that means to believe in that your life belongs to something greater now. He passes the torch to Kilowog. We see legacy being born, ideals being carried on from one hero to the next. The story then flows to Lyra, and it is of how one can change their destiny by becoming more than that they were meant to be. Lyra's father, a warlord, despises his own daughter for the ring to have chosen her over him. But through a brutal fight we learn that this is not truly about that. It is about a father's resentment of his daughter not needing him anymore. That when she needed help, she called out to her new family, the Green Lanterns, and not him. He regains his honor with ritual suicide and accepts his place in the afterlife, as Lyra accepts her in the world, as the true protector of Jade, and as a Green Lantern. We're shown the vestiges of a war happening in the background, but the story chooses to focus on the fight between a father and a daughter. In a grand war, we're just shown bits and pieces of it, because the narrative calls for something more intimate, something closer to home, something that conjures an emotion we're all too familiar with. In the next part of the story, we hear about Mogo. Mogo is the most powerful Green Lantern, the most powerful warrior in all of the galaxies. But he doesn't like to socialize. You wonder why? Well, that's because he is a fucking planet. Do you ask yourself, well, how does a planet wear a ring? How is a planet even sentient? Or do you accept it and watch this planet fuck with a would-be conqueror named Bolfanga for days before eventually murdering him? In the last story, Hal Jordan's predecessor Abin Sur fights Atrocitus, an evil criminal speaking dark prophecies. Abin Sur was assisted by Sinestro in capturing the alien. Sinestro and Abin Sur then had a conversation relating to the warnings that Atrocitus spoke of, and Sinestro insisted that he did not believe in destiny. Parting ways, Abin Sur took the criminal to the prison planet Yasmalt, where Atrocitus again spoke of Abin Sur's imminent death. He also warned Abin that Sinestro would rise against the Green Lantern Corps and create his own Lantern Corps built on the power of fear. Abin Sur, however, refused to believe that his friend would betray his Green Lantern duties and left Atrocitus imprisoned. He believes in destiny, but he believes in his friend Sinestro and his willpower even more. We don't question how Atrocitus knows all this, and we don't question why Abin Sur has this unwavering faith in his friend. The nuance of the acting informs us that that is just how it is. We don't focus on the details, we focus on the emotions. The final act sees the Green Lantern Corps defeat Krona by crushing him in between the Sun and Oa, the Lantern home planet. As matter destroys antimatter, we see thousands of lanterns move a planet with their willpower. But not for 1 second do we say to ourselves, this is impossible, or this is unrealistic. Because the story, the character, the acting and everything else carries much greater weight than the world building does. Because every moment of a story must represent the triumph of writing over world building. World building is dull. World building literalizes the urge to invent. World building gives an unnecessary permission for acts of writing and indeed for acts of reading. World building numbs the reader's ability to fulfill their part of the bargain because it believes that it has to do everything around here if anything is going to get done. And so a story about stories of all kinds of aliens using their imagination as their greatest weapon is asking you to do the same. Use your imagination. And that, my friends, is the true wonder of fiction. Thank you for watching this long video, guys, and if you're still here, know how much I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. If you want to watch more content like this, please hit the subscribe button. If you liked what you saw, hit the like button. And if you thought I was full of shit, then hit the dislike button. Anything you do is cool. I'm just glad you're here.